Good evening, Facebook family. Thank you for joining Janice and Brian again this Sunday. We have an awesome discussion for you today. We're going to bring in, Brian is going to do the majority of the speaking today and the informing of today on immigration, major U.S. immigration laws. This is going to be awesome. I promise you, you want to tell as many people as you can to chime in today, and you really want to hear this. You really need to get this into your psyche today, and it'll empower you and encourage you to really research and study and to look at what has happened just say 400 years ago to see that things really aren't that different today than they were during slavery. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you Mr. Brian Wise.
Hello, everyone. Good to be with everyone again. So we, as Janice said, we want to talk a little bit about the effects of immigration as it relates to African Americans. We want to deal with two facets of this. Basically, number one, everyone needs to understand the whole concept of immigration, what immigration actually means. How does it really affect us as a people, as a group of people here in America? And whether or not immigration is actually a pro for African Americans, or if it is something that is actually detrimental to us as African Americans. So one of the things that we want to look at, I want to go back to the first Immigration Act, or the first act written by Congress. That took place in 1790. That act was titled the Naturalization Act, or either the Naturalization or Citizenship Act. Basically what that act did in 1790, now keep in mind, we were talking about 1790, this is 1 year after 1789 and the adaptation of the United States Constitution, what we know as the United States Constitution. The 1790 Naturalization Act actually made it possible for white immigrants, and in the act it was actually designated that white people coming from the Western Hemisphere, that would be Europe, that would be Great Britain, had access to come over to the Americas without any repercussions, to actually own land and to better themselves based off of the Revolutionary War that had ended and the adaptation of the 1789 U.S. Constitution. What that did in that act, it actually specified that any white immigrants of naturalization, meaning that coming from the Western Hemisphere, would actually be considered citizens at that time. Not only that, what made that so significant is at that same time, you had Europeans that were already here in the United States that owned slaves. Slaves were never mentioned in the 1790 Naturalization Act as being a part of the United States, nor were they ever considered to be citizens at any point and at any time in the United States. So the first Naturalization Act, the 1790 Naturalization and Citizenship Act, paved the way for more Europeans to come to the United States, to come as a banishment class, and the only thing they had to do that Congress demanded that would actually have to happen for them to do that was that they had to be in good moral standings when they came to the United States, and they had to declare their allegiance to the United States Constitution. Those were the only two requirements. I want you all to go back and do research on that. And the reason that we're bringing this up, the reason that is so important is because, like I said, there were African Americans that were already here at that time. We know that our ancestors, if we go back to 1619, we go back to Jamestown, we go back to the 20 African Americans that actually came over on ships. It entered into Jamestown, at that time served as indentured servants. And from that point, we see the actual migration of slaves and the slave population grow tremendously. We see by late 16th century, early 17th century, we see the formation of slavery take place. So we know there were many, many, many Africans here during the period of 1790 when this Naturalization Act was written, and they were purposely left out of the equation, which we call the United States. They were purposely not put into citizenship acts because they were considered to be property at that time and not citizens. Keep that in mind. That's a simple caveat that you must understand. And we've been talking about this for now 2-3 months. And the reason that we've been talking about it is because what you see happening today is very significant with the title of being a citizen. So in 1790, you have the first Naturalization Act. You have the African American, even though they are here in this country, left out of the Naturalization Act purposely. And people that are targeted as immigrants coming into the country were whites. And it was white only. It was specified white only. So white onlys were coming in as long as they was in good moral standing, and they pledged an allegiance to the United States Constitution, the United States government. Then they had all rights as of any other citizen in the country at that time. Now, when they came in as management class. Not only that, they came in with access to land and access to property, which at that time were slaves. So we need to understand the dynamic of that. That's the first thing. And then the second act that we want to look at from a historical standpoint is the 1864 Immigration Act. 1864 Immigration Act cleared the way for the United States to bring in a labor class people as it relates to replacing the slave population that had been deemed a free people by way of the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, understand this. When the United States clears the way to bring in more immigrants, they bring them in under the concept of them replacing the slaves, which now are considered to be free people, but yet not given any rights of a citizen. Still, even though the slaves were released, they were not given any rights of a citizen because they were not acknowledged as citizens in the United States Constitution, nor were they ever acknowledged as citizens up under these United States Congress and Senate and the Supreme Court. So they were looked at as 3/5 of a man. Even though you have the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment to the United States Constitution, it does not deal with citizenship. What it deals with is social measures, meaning that any person that is here in the United States should have the opportunity to have equal rights, and social justices as any other white person that existed in the United States prior to this act, or prior to the 1864 Immigration Act. So it paves a way for the United States to start bringing in labor and bringing in another labor class to replace the slave labor that was given for, now we're talking about over 100 years to this country with no compensation. Keep in mind, it was free labor that the slaves offered to this country with no compensation, and now to further undermine those individuals that were already here that had no rights, to further undermine them, they create a immigration act to allow a labor class to come in and to replace slave labor. Very significant, very important as it relates to what is going on now. Now, let's fast forward from 1864, and then I'm going to let Janice break back in. From 1864, let's fast forward to 1942. In 1942, you have the Mexican Immigration Act, which the Mexican Immigration Act was actually written based off of labor becoming very, very low at that time, or personnel concerning being able to do labor jobs because of World War II. Mm-hmm. The population as it relates to labor workers diminished and decreased because a lot of young men went off to war. They were opening up factories and industries to produce weapons of war, things of that nature. So a lot of the laborers in the farm industry and the agricultural industry were pulled away to go to war, or either to go into the industrial factories and make weapons of war. So they create, in 1942, Congress passes an Immigration Act that allows and paves the way for over 5.6 million Mexicans to come into America and to replace the labor that had been taken out of the agricultural industry by way of the war. They bring them in to replace that labor. They paid them a what they considered to be a fair wage at that time to replace this labor.
They give them housing.
They give them housing. All of those things are included. That act was called the Bracero Act. And the word bracero is from the Spanish meaning that actually means one that works with their arms. So they bring in a flux of people there again to replace labor personnel in the agricultural industry. Now, what is never addressed at that time, what's never addressed is the fact that we also had African American people that served in World War II, and we had African American families that served in World War II. Once World War II ended, there's another act, 1945, 1946, the War Brides Act is actually put in place. The War Brides Act allows a pathway or makes a pathway for all war veterans who marry outside of the United States to bring their wives and children back in the United States and to be considered citizens. The majority of the population that was affected would be your Asian population. The Japanese, Vietnamese, the Koreans, Philippines, all of those wives that were taken by U.S. soldiers, and predominantly 90% even Italians or Italy, because they were a part of this, those wives were permitted, and the children of those wives were permitted to come over to the United States and have a free pathway of citizenship. At that time, that meant that they were entitled to from that point, every act that was put in place to actually support the wives of those veterans. Unfortunately, only not even 1% of those veterans' wives were two black men. The ones that were two black men could not take part of the War Brides Act. They had to stay wherever they were. That's significant about that, see, because we're still talking about the repopulating of a people that is already here and the replacement of a people that is already here as a labor class people. I need you to understand that. I don't need you to understand the whole concept of what's happening historically and what has always happened as it relates to African people being put at the bottom of the food chain. African people have not, since this country's inception, been considered to be an integral part of this country. So we have to focus on making ourselves important. I said this once before in another program. We are not children of a lesser God. We are children of a God that is equal to any other God in this creation. So we have to make sure that our leaders understand, that we understand, that we are just as significant as anybody else that you are bringing to this country, and yet continuing to ignore the real issues of our community. So now in each one of these acts, the labor class is replaced. In each one of these acts, wages are given. And with those acts being put in place and labor and wages being given, it continues to not only undermine but diminish the value of the African person at that time as relates to already being in this country.
Exactly.
Okay, so those acts, and then we will deal with some more acts that I want to just kind of reference.
Yes.
But those are two important acts that we need to understand as it relates to immigration. Okay, so I'm gonna let you chime in for a second, and then we'll get back to some more of this history.
Okay. Oh wow. Yeah. What I get from this, what I really understand, I want everybody to understand, is that things really haven't changed. We were just a lot of the meat of these acts and part of the Constitution. We were just not privy to. We were never taught. It was never taught in schools. They left out a lot of valuable information, and they taught things to us that they only wanted us to know. Basically, they tried to dress it up. Am I right on that, Brian?
That's right.
They tried to dress it up. So with that being said, you have to do your research. You have to listen to people or programs like Brian, and there are a lot of others out there that are giving you this information. But we still have not gotten what we really deserve, and that is reparations. And I don't know if you really understood that piece. When they went and they bought people from the Western Hemisphere, they were not Africans. That's not in the Western Hemisphere. Those were Europeans that they brought over to this country. They bought them here. They worked here. They were paid fair wages. We were not paid. We were already here. Our ancestors were already here. They were not paid. These people were given fair wages and room and board. I guess we lived on the plantation. They didn't live on the plantation. They were given the opportunity to bring their families here. We were already here. We could not live outside of the plantation. We didn't. There were some that were able to, but I don't think there were many where they're brought.
No.
So it is important that we recognize, when are we going to be receive our services, our reward for our labor? When are we going to be paid reparations? You know, they came over and they were automatically given. And a lot of, like we talked before, they were given tax breaks, 5-10 years without paying any taxes. They were privy to a lot of things. We've never gotten that. In fact, we lost all of that. One thing we don't understand, there were a lot of African American families that had farms.
Absolutely. And that is something that is never dealt with. So when we look at the black farmers situation, we can go into the history of that. The black farmers, specifically in the Delta, Mississippi Delta region, in the Black Belt area of Alabama, those farmers never got their just due. They were never paid according to the government pay structure as relates to farms. They never received their fair compensation. So that's what the Black Farmers Act was about. That's what the Black Farmers Lawsuit was about. Let me rephrase that. So they were discriminated against based on them being second and third generation farmers from sharecroppers and slaves, and never were paid fair compensation as it relates to the National Agriculture Farmers Association. They were never paid what it stated that each farmer was entitled to by way of government loans, subsidiary programs that they did not have to pay back. So that's a whole different discussion, but it falls into the same category. When we look at the immigration labor that came over during the 1942 Act that worked on the farms, black farmers could not afford any help. No, so the immigration labor that came, so you're talking about California, that area where the bigger farms at that time were, they were able to pay the wages to those people to help out on the farms. Black farmers were not able to pay, so they got no assistance with their farm at no point, even when the war started. What the Immigration Act allowed was that labor to replace farm workers that had gone off to war. Well, the black farmers that, for whatever reason, if they got drafted and they went to war, their farms, that's right, their farms were left unattended, and most of them lost their farms. So listen, understand this, that we as African Americans have never been given our just due as it relates to being treated fairly economically. That is not a debate in the United States. Every other immigrant people that have come into this country have been entitled to different federal programs to assist them economically to get a jump start in this country, whether it be to as it relates to starting businesses, whether it be going into family businesses that are already here,
tax breaks,
it be, everything. They have already, they come here with the upper hand. We have never justly been treated as it relates to economics, and then we can go on down the line, but economics is the number one key here. When we talk about being able to function as a community and to be able to function as a productive community in this society. If we do not deal with that, then everything else that we're dealing with is trivial. So now we've seen, just for instance, and let's pay homage to our ancestor John Lewis that have passed, who was a fighter.
He was a fighter.
We need leaders now in the African American community that will stop dealing with the minutia. And what I call is the minutia is police justice, and that's all you're talking about. And there's no economic justice with police justice. It does no good to deal with strictly police justice, and you cannot put money in the African American pocket that you are slaying. If you give the African American enough to live with, that automatically, I can decrease crime overnight by putting money in people's pocket. Until you deal with paying us for the labor of our ancestors that built this country, then all the rest of the stuff is simply minutia. It's not worth anything. And just like we were talking about, now that George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery,
all of that,
Breonna Taylor, all of these things as it relates to police justice, now that it's dying down, you're seeing the rhetoric die down. The movements are still going, but the movements are not as active. Why? Because they have no teeth. We need to deal with real issues. So it does no good to be out marching with BLM on our shirt when we're not dealing with the real issues in our community. And the real issues is a lack of funding in our communities. So when you look at that, it crosses every spectrum that we deal with in our community. It crosses crime, it crosses education, it crosses health, it deals with every issue. And until we deal with that, That's why reparations is so important. Because every other immigrant people in every other nation of immigrants have been fairly and duly compensated.
They have.
We have to deal with that, guys. And so I want to deal with, we're running a little close on time, but I want to deal with one last thing, and I actually wrote this down so that it would not slip my memory.
You gotta hear this. This is awesome.
As I share this with you, but this was 2 weeks ago, broadcasted on MSNBC, on CNN, on Fox Live. I don't know if you all caught this. On July the 9th, President Donald J. Trump signed an executive order for the Hispanic Prosperity Act. Now, keep in mind, and let me say this, just preference this. We're not prejudiced toward our Hispanic brothers and sisters.
No,
okay?
No, we're not.
But we have to deal with the facts here. President Trump signs an executive order for the Hispanic Prosperity Act, and this is what the act deals with. It focuses on improving economic opportunities for Hispanic Americans. It establishes an advisory committee and or commission on prosperity. That commission deals with identifying the best practices to start businesses. It deals with the best practices for school choice. It deals with and encourages private sector initiatives as it relates to partnering with Hispanics and monies, funding for Hispanics to start businesses in their communities. It deals with job creation and business startup. It deals with health care.
Yes.
And funding healthcare institutions that will actually offer care and assistance to Hispanic communities. All of this. Now, this act signed July the 9th with pretty much everything that the Hispanic caucus said that this is what's going on with our people and you need to address it. And they put an act before him and he signs an executive order to deal with it. Now, let me preference this because I'm hard when it comes to black leadership because we don't have any black leadership.
Say it.
The black caucus is the white caucus in blackface, in my opinion.
That's exactly
Even though I respect certain members of the black caucus, we do not bring real issues to the floor and we do not demand anything. The black caucus taking up the Police Justice Act is really a facade, is smoke and mirrors as it relates to the real problems in our community.
Come on now.
This Hispanic caucus brings to President Trump demands, and they state, this is what we want to focus on. We want to focus, hold on, baby. We want to focus on real issues that face our people. We want to focus on economic development. We want to focus on our kids being able to go to their schools and teach our heritage, teach our curriculum. Those are the things. We want to focus on healthcare being given to our people of the genotype of Hispanic and not African Americans and Eurasian and all the rest of them. We want to focus on our community. Very, very powerful. We have to do the same thing. We need leadership that will say, hold up, enough of the smoke and the mirrors. The police, you've been hanging, lynching, terrorizing us since the early 16th century. And now we want to deal with the real issues. At no time were we fairly and justly compensated for the labor of our people. Still at no time in this United States history has African American people been fairly compensated, justly compensated. We need to deal with the real issues. The reason that you see an influx of people leaving public schools, let's deal with the reality of it, is because the government is backing out because public schools now becoming again predominantly African American, and they bring up all type of issues to the table that says that our children cannot learn, they're unruly, they're ungoverned, they're out of order, their parents can't parent. So what we do is we pull out of that system, we create other systems, pseudo systems, whether it be charter schools, whether it be private schools, to where we do not have to intermingle with them. We have to deal with the real. We are looking at, the whole concept that we are looking at is still the same. And that issue is that we do not want to be a part of their community. We don't really want them a part of our community. And we don't think they can function in society. So we have to deal with economics. When it comes to building a community, you cannot build a community off of prayer and faith. You need money. Now, let me say this before we end.
Okay, baby.
Hispanics unemployment last year dropped to 3.9%.
Wow.
African Americans unemployment rate has been and still is over 35%. Okay? That's only the ones that are able to apply for unemployment. That does not count the part of our population that cannot work because they have been systemically put in a system that does not give them the same opportunity to go out and get a job because they're discriminated against for having even misdemeanor records or felony records. So that doesn't count for that population, nor does it count for the population of African American people that have disabilities that would not allow them to work. So when you throw that population in there, we're over 40%.
Wow.
As it relates to unemployment rate. Not only that, last year, the Hispanic median household income surpassed $50,000 a year. The African American median household income has been stuck for the last 2 years below $30,000 a year. So we aren't dealing with the real issue. And I'm passionate about this, I think.
Yes, you are.
Because we're dealing with stuff that really has no teeth. Our leaders, and for whatever reason, doesn't seem to have the backbone to stand up on a Senate floor and actually deal out the facts and tell this is what the facts are. Now, I didn't even go into the history of the Chinese acts
you didn't. No.
and the Chinese immigration laws, the exclusions and the inclusions, because they played a tremendous part in the late 17th century of this country as it relates to labor. That is one particular reason that the United States and China are still at odds with each other. It's because the Chinese have never forgotten what their people did as it relates to also building the railroads and going into the coal mines in this country. They have never forgotten that. So they stick up for their people. We have to get back to the place to where we have leadership that sticks up for African American people unapologetically and stop trying to mix and mingle with every group that comes along and say, we care about your lives. Guess what? In essence, they don't really care about your lives. They care about their agenda, because the Civil Rights Act of 1965 has been turned on its head and is now used to support every group in America socially, except the group that it was written for, which are African Americans. There is a problem with that.
Come on now.
We need to get back to really dealing with issues in our community. And until you deal with the economic issue, guess what? Schools are going to continue to decline.
Yes.
Our children are going to continue to lag behind. They're going to continue to deal with social issues as it relates to mingling in public, understanding how this society works. They're going to continue. We're going to continue to have health problems. We're going to continue to deal with stress on a level that no other people group, no other nation deals with in this country. Above what African Americans have to deal with. So these are the things, sweetie, that I think we have to address,
Yes.
and I'm going to turn it back over to you so you can end.
Wow. Now, you know what? He only just covered the surface.
Yes.
It's much deeper.
It is.
But what I'm going to do, we're going to close out because we are a stickler for time. And I'm going to share this immediately. Once we go off, I'm going to do another watch. So at any time you can share any of this information. We don't mind. In fact, we want you to share. We encourage you to share.
Please.
We are passionate about this. Bigger things are coming down the pipeline. You watch and see. You're going to hear a lot more from Brian and Janice. Get ready. And we're not going to stop. We're going to fight this thing to the core. And if you want to join us, come right on. If you don't, oh well, you'll still reap the benefits, okay?
That's right.
So we love you guys, and we mean it. It's no joke. We encourage you to share this video with as many people as you can because it is serious. It is time for us to rise up as a people and take back what was stolen from us.
Yes.
Okay? We love you. Peace out.
Bye-bye, y'all.